Imagine this: you're suddenly transported back to the year 1187. The air is thick with dust and iron, and standing right in front of you is a crusader, a man encased head to toe in steel visor down, sword in hand. You've got your modern gym membership, your protein shakes. Maybe you even do CrossFit. You think you're tough. You think you'd stand a chance. In the next few minutes, you're going to find out just how catastrophically wrong you are. A single medieval knight would destroy you so completely that historians would struggle to find enough of you to write about. Because everything you think you know about knights is wrong. These weren't just random guys who owned armor and a horse. They were the products of the most intense, brutal, and systematic warrior training program in all of human history. A system so effective that it produced fighters whose physical performance would make today's elite special forces look like hobbyists. Training began at age 7. While modern kids learn how to tie their shoes, medieval pages began a 20-year transformation into living weapons. They started as servants, learning reading and writing, yes, but also horse care. Basic sword drills and the foundations of combat. Every single day, no breaks, no summer holidays, no calling in sick. At 14, they became squires, and that's when things got serious. Physical conditioning alone would hospitalize most modern athletes. They carried and pushed enormous stones, hurled weighted spears heavier than real ones, and wrestled for hours. Every exercise had one goal: to harden the body into an instrument of endurance, balance, and killing precision. Knighthood required mastering what they called the 7 points of agility: riding, swimming, diving, climbing, fencing, wrestling, and tournament fighting. And yes, even dancing. Because footwork in combat meant life or death. A misstep wasn't just embarrassing, it was fatal. One legendary knight, Jean de Lille de la Grille, nicknamed Boucicaut, became famous for climbing up the underside of a ladder using only his hands while wearing 27 kilograms of armor. That's 60 pounds of steel strapped to his body, and he could still perform feats that would challenge professional climbers without gear. Archaeological findings back this up. Medieval manuscripts and effigies repeatedly show knights mounting horses unassisted in full armor. No ladders, no help, just raw functional strength. Researchers who've reconstructed medieval combat training have found that a knight's overall fitness rivaled that of modern pro footballers or tennis players, except they did it all while wearing armor that weighed as much as a small child. And that armor, forget Hollywood's nonsense about clunky, immovable tin suits. A well-crafted suit of plate armor weighed between 15 and 25 kilograms, perfectly distributed across the body. It didn't make them slow, it made them unstoppable. They could run, jump, roll, and fight with terrifying agility. But that mobility came with a cost, and it shows just how superhuman these warriors really were. Biomechanical studies reveal that wearing full medieval armor required 2.3 times more energy to walk and 1.9 times more energy to run. In battle, they sustain that near double energy output for hours. Your gym routine doesn't even come close. And that's just the physical side. Weapon training was equally brutal. Sword fighting wasn't the graceful dance you see in movies. It was savage, exhausting, and horrifically efficient. Battlefield skeletons show multiple blunt force fractures and deep blade wounds, proof of a fighting style that focused not on elegance, but on domination. A knight's goal wasn't to duel, it was to annihilate. They drilled endlessly to master the sword building, the muscle memory needed to swing heavy blades with lethal precision. Their regimen even included early forms of progressive overload, increasing resistance and endurance through repetition and weight, just like modern strength programs. Except their mistakes didn't mean a pulled muscle, they meant death. The mental conditioning was just as extreme. Historical accounts describe knights who continued fighting long after suffering injuries that would incapacitate modern soldiers. Through years of combat and adrenaline exposure, they achieved a state of controlled fury, a kind of battle trance that few modern athletes or fighters can even imagine. When these men rode into battle, they weren't acting alone. They were part of a synchronized killing machine that weaponized physics. A knight on horseback, fully armored, charging with a lance at 32 kilometers per hour, that's over 20 miles an hour, generated an immense kinetic force. Mass times acceleration equals destruction. Their lances could pierce shields and shatter enemy lines in a single impact. Even Muslim chroniclers who fought against the Crusaders wrote about the terrifying power and cohesion of Frankish cavalry charges. These weren't chaotic rushes, they were mathematically precise maneuvers. Riders formed wedge-shaped units, knee to knee, forming an unstoppable wall of steel muscle and horseflesh. Entire armies broke under the sheer psychological pressure of seeing that formation thundering toward them. And that brings us to the most terrifying truth of all. These knights weren't just physically superior. They were psychologically programmed for violence in a way that would break modern people.
For God,
From childhood,
for glory,
they were taught that
for
fighting
honor.
wasn't a last resort, it was their divine purpose. Death in battle wasn't feared, it was glorified. Pain wasn't avoided, it was embraced as the path to honor. You, with your modern mindset, your comfort, your safety, your empathy, you'd be broken long before the fight even started. The moment you saw a fully armored knight charging straight at you, lance aimed at your chest, your brain would shut down. You'd freeze. Chroniclers from the Middle Ages wrote of experienced warriors who froze in terror at the sight of a knightly charge. Now imagine how you'd react in sneakers holding a dumbbell facing that. Let's talk about the weapons, because this is where things get truly brutal. The knight's sword wasn't some heavy chunk of metal, it was a precision instrument of death, refined over centuries, balanced to perfection, designed to cut, stab, and crush with minimal effort. A typical longsword weighed just 1 to 2 kilograms, but in the hands of a trained knight, it moved like an extension of his body. Their fighting style combined cuts, thrusts, grapples, and pommel strikes in seamless flows. It took modern martial artists decades to replicate those moves, but knights practiced them daily until they became instinct. Their reflexes were wired so deep that even when exhausted, bleeding, or fighting in total darkness, they could execute killing strikes automatically. And swords were just one weapon in their arsenal. They mastered lances for mounted combat, maces for crushing armor, daggers for lethal close quarters finishing, and even crossbows for range attacks. You might have seen a few YouTube videos about medieval weapons. They spent 20 years living them. Their endurance bordered on the impossible. Modern athletes train hard, but they rest, recover, and use nutrition science to stay safe. Knights trained through injury. They fought through torn muscles, broken bones, and open wounds. Historical accounts describe knights continuing to fight with broken ribs and deep cuts injuries that would send most people into shock. This wasn't just courage, it was conditioning, a deliberate rewiring of body and mind to keep functioning under trauma. Your protein shakes, your recovery days, your supplements, none of it would matter. When you're facing someone who has spent 2 decades training for one purpose, to kill you in close combat, nothing else counts. Let's be clear, this isn't about fantasy, this is about biomechanics, psychology, and the terrifying efficiency of human evolution under pressure. Because if you were to actually stand across from a Crusader knight, what you'd face isn't just muscle or steel. It's centuries of perfected warfare condensed into one human being. Think about what that means. You train for aesthetics, abs, shoulders, definition. They train for survival, to kill efficiently, to absorb punishment, to endure exhaustion until their enemy collapsed. That's an entirely different species of discipline. Every movement a knight made was functional. Every meal, every drill, every scar served a single purpose: dominance in close combat. They didn't go to the gym for a pump. They lived inside a 20-year crucible of pain, repetition, and purpose. Their entire society revolved around producing them the perfect weaponized human. And the deeper you look, the more horrifying it gets.
My purpose.
Modern people underestimate the medieval mind. We see them as primitive, superstitious, dirty, unscientific. But in terms of psychological conditioning, they were light years ahead in one brutal domain, turning fear into fuel. Where you see violence as trauma, they saw it as transcendence. Where you'd freeze, they'd charge. Where you'd hesitate, they'd strike. Now remember what we said about armor. A Crusader wasn't lumbering around like a tin can. He was an apex predator built for momentum. Even modern reenactors wearing historically accurate suits have demonstrated cartwheels, rolls, sprints, and vaults in full armor. 15 to 25 kilograms of perfectly balanced steel doesn't make you slow. It makes you unstoppable because it turns you into a walking tank without losing agility. But even the armor was just the shell. What lived inside was more dangerous. That body, forged by years of carrying stones, climbing ropes, swimming rivers, and fighting every single day, was engineered to withstand punishment. Their ligaments, tendons, and bone density would be off the charts by today's standards. Modern sports medicine says rest when injured. A knight's instructor said, if you can stand, you can train. That's how they built durability that bordered on inhuman. Biomechanically, you wouldn't even be playing the same game. A knight's grip, strength, explosive power, and stamina were shaped by the physics of real weapons, not gym machines. Swinging a sword for hours, blocking strikes that generate hundreds of pounds of force, wrestling in armor that's not exercise. That's human torture turned into training, and they thrived in it. Their pain tolerance was so extreme that modern neuroscience can barely quantify it. These men were routinely exposed to open wounds infections and the sight of death since childhood. They didn't just accept pain, they integrated it into their identity. To flinch was dishonor, to endure was divine. And here's the part that truly breaks the modern ego. Even their reflexes were faster than yours. Years of combat sharpened them into reading micro-movements, shifts in stance, breath, and gaze that revealed an opponent's next move. They didn't think in fights, they reacted. Before your nervous system even processed danger, theirs had already countered. Let's say, hypothetically, you somehow got close enough to land a strike. It wouldn't matter. Your punch, your kick, even your best MMA combo useless against layered steel that can deflect arrows. Every clang of your weapon would echo your failure, because that armor didn't just protect it, mocked your strength. And while you're still reeling, he's closing distance eyes, fixed sword or mace, swinging with decades of honed precision. That sound steel colliding with steel would be the last thing you hear before your vision fills with dirt and darkness. Archaeological studies confirm it. On medieval battlefields, skeletons show evidence of surgical, efficient killing techniques, not chaotic brawls. Fractures exactly where armor joints met. Skull cracks targeted at weak points. These weren't wild swings. They were engineered executions. And yet here's the most humbling realization of all: the Crusaders weren't even the peak of human combat evolution. They were just the best documented example in Europe. Across the world, similar systems were forming: samurai in Japan, Mamluks in Egypt, Mongol horse archers in Central Asia. Each culture developed its own version of the same terrifying equation: take a child, strip away comfort, and forge them into a weapon. For the Crusaders, that weapon was wrapped in faith. Their violence wasn't random, it was sanctified. Killing wasn't murder, it was service to God. That belief system didn't just motivate them, it freed them. A knight charging into a Muslim line at Hattin or Jerusalem wasn't thinking of survival. He believed his death was a ticket to heaven. How do you fight someone who wants to die for his cause? That mindset created a psychological imbalance no modern fighter can handle. You train to win, they train to die well. And that's why the comparison between modern fitness and medieval combat readiness is almost insulting. You can bench twice your body weight, congratulations. They could swing a sword the weight of your barbell for hours under the sun while dehydrated, bleeding and suffocating inside a helmet. They fought not for PRs or likes, but for survival, for honor and for God himself. And when that kind of purpose merges with decades of training, it creates something terrifying: a human being who no longer fears the consequences of pain or death. That's what you'd face across the field. Not a man, but a system, a lineage, a philosophy that believed endurance was sacred and fear was weakness. When a Crusader charged, he wasn't just using strength, he was unleashing centuries of warfare knowledge, honed tactics, and military science. That wedge-shaped cavalry formation we mentioned earlier, it wasn't random chaos, it was physics weaponized. Hundreds of armored riders compressed into a cone, knees touching, shields overlapping, accelerating as one a living missile of steel and bone. The shockwave of that impact could rip through entire infantry lines. Not even the bravest soldiers could stand their ground. Many simply dropped their weapons and ran. Modern historians and forensic analysts have recreated these charges with mounted reenactors, and even at reduced speed, the kinetic impact is devastating. Imagine tons of moving metal slamming into a human wall. That wasn't warfare, that was annihilation. And when the dust settled, the knights didn't cheer. They regrouped, rearmed, advanced again. Because this wasn't sport, it wasn't about adrenaline. It was routine. You can't outlift that kind of psychology. You can't out-train that kind of obsession. You'd have to be reborn into their world, a world where mercy was weakness, pain was instruction, and death was deliverance. By now you can probably feel it, the growing realization that modern comfort has cost us something. We've gained convenience, medicine, and safety, but we've lost the edge that once defined what it meant to be human at war. Crusaders weren't superheroes. They were the logical product of an environment that demanded absolute mastery of violence just to survive. And the results were terrifyingly effective. Here's the hardest truth to swallow. The Crusader wasn't a fluke of history. He was proof, brutal, undeniable proof of what human beings become when the stakes are survival, not comfort. And when you compare that to modern life, the contrast is almost tragic. Today, we lift weights for aesthetics. They lifted armor to live another day. We talk about discipline. They were disciplined. Every breath, every bruise, every dawn that broke over the training yard carved them closer to perfection. Their world didn't reward excuses, it erased them. Think about what it means to be raised like that. At 7, your parents hand you off to a noble household. From that moment, your childhood ends. No play dates, no comfort, just drills, cold mornings, and pain shaped into habit. By 14, you're already a squire, a full-time trainee, living alongside your knightmaster. You learn to polish armor, care for war horses, clean blood from blades, and eventually fight in mock battles that could kill you. Every scar, every failure, every fall was education. They didn't find motivation, they didn't need it. The world motivated them because weakness got you killed. And by the time they were knighted, they weren't just fit, they were transformed. Their muscles didn't come from machines, they came from necessity. Their endurance wasn't built in air-conditioned gyms, it was forged on muddy fields, under siege walls and across miles of rough terrain. That kind of strength doesn't fade when you're tired. It begins when you're tired. So when people today say, I could take a knight or we're stronger now, they miss the point entirely. Strength isn't about muscle mass, it's about function, tolerance, and purpose. And on every one of those fronts, the Crusader outclasses us. Even their metabolism was different. Recent studies on energy expenditure in armor show that moving in full plate consumes over twice the oxygen of normal movement, and yet knights could sustain it for hours. Their hearts, lungs, and vascular systems were adapted for constant strain. You'd gas out before the first minute of combat. They'd fight until nightfall. And yet even that wasn't what made them terrifying. It was their mindset. Because these men truly believed that God himself watched their every swing. Victory wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Defeat meant eternal shame. That belief system created an unbreakable warrior psychology, one that fused faith with fury. That's why Crusader armies could charge into hopeless battles and still hold formation. That's why, even when drenched in sweat, covered in dust, and breathing through metal visors, they didn't panic. Their endurance came from somewhere deeper, from a world where dying for something greater than yourself wasn't tragedy, it was purpose. Now fast forward to today, we've traded that raw survival instinct for convenience. We no longer need to be strong, so most of us simply aren't. We lift weights to look good, not to defend a village. We run to count calories, not to deliver messages across battlefields. We talk about mental toughness, but most people break after a few hours of discomfort or a few harsh words online. The Crusader didn't believe in resilience, he embodied it. And it's worth asking, what does that say about us? Have we evolved beyond the need for hardship, or have we just become fragile? Because for all our science and comfort, we've lost something primal, something that once made us unstoppable. It's easy to admire knights as relics, armored men from dusty paintings, but look closer and you see a mirror, a reflection of what we could still be if our lives demanded that level of mastery again. That's not to glorify the violence of their world. It's to understand the reality of what pressure creates. When everything depends on your ability to endure pain, fear, and exhaustion, you evolve into something extraordinary. That's the real story of the Crusader. Not the Crusades themselves, not the politics or the empires, but the human being underneath the steel. A child molded by fire and faith into a machine of purpose. A living proof that the limits we think we have are illusions. Archaeologists have found battlefields littered with skeletal remains that still bear the precision of their craft. Clean cuts through bone, symmetrical strikes through armor joints, calculated blows to the base of the skull. It wasn't rage, it was method. They killed the way a surgeon operates, with precision born from repetition. And yet, the most haunting part is that the Crusaders were only one chapter in humanity's capacity for adaptation. They weren't gods, they were men who simply lived in a world that required their evolution. And when you remove that pressure, as we did, that level of conditioning fades. The gap between them and us isn't just physical, it's philosophical. They believed pain was necessary. We believe it's a mistake. They trained until they broke, then rebuilt stronger. We stop at the first sign of strain. But here's the paradox, that same potential still exists in us. It's buried, but it's not gone. We still carry the same biology, the same muscles, the same hearts, the same capacity for endurance and mastery. The difference is in our genetics. It's our environment. The Crusader reminds us what happens when purpose replaces comfort. When fear becomes focus, when belief becomes armor, and when pain becomes progress. He is a relic of a forgotten truth that human beings are capable of far more than we think. That what we call limits are just symptoms of comfort. And that the line between ordinary and extraordinary isn't talent, it's tolerance. So the next time you feel strong because you finished your workout or hit a personal best, remember this: a 12-year-old squire, after just 5 years of training, would already have the skill and endurance to overwhelm most modern adults. A fully trained crusader represented the apex of the most efficient combat culture humanity ever produced. You wouldn't last seconds against him. You wouldn't survive long enough to even understand how completely outmatched you were. And that's not an insult, it's perspective. Because their world demanded greatness and ours doesn't. We've gained technology, medicine, and comfort, but somewhere along the way we lost the fire that built civilizations. The Crusader, brutal, relentless, terrifying, as a reminder of what that fire once looked like. He shows us what humans become when survival and mastery are the same thing. He shows us the price of strength and the cost of losing it. So be grateful you'll never have to prove yourself against one. But don't forget what they prove about you, that buried inside every modern human is the potential for something far greater. A body that endures, a mind that refuses to break, and a spirit that once awakened could once again make history tremble.